And I think that's the time for our superstar. Niall, welcome on stage. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Superstar. Wow, it's quite something. Let me see if I can ensure that I am going to share my screen. Let's see which one. There we go. Let's allow this. Everyone, hope it works. Okay. So can people see my screen? Mike, can you say something very pleasant if you can see the Camunda 8 thing?
I can see the Camunda 8 thing, indeed.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Hey, everybody. So yes, I'm going to talk about Camunda 8 and also Camunda 7 briefly within the context. I'm called Niall Deehan. I'm a developer advocate with Camunda. I sadly do not speak Russian, which is why I'll be speaking English just now. But luckily, a colleague I trust a lot happily translated my title and name for me, which I hope is accurate, although I have no way of finding out. I work as a developer advocate for Camunda. I do a lot of presentations, a lot of code examples, because I used to be a developer for years, and I have been with Camunda for a little over 7 years. The reason I say this is because I can answer most questions, technical questions about Camunda. So if you have anything at all, I would love to hear those questions. And if I generally can't answer them immediately, I'm sure I'll know a docs page that might have a good answer for you. So that is my specialty. So as was pointed out earlier, there is a Q&A tab, I think, in the Google Meet thing. So feel free to put stuff in there if you like. At the end, I'll get to those questions. For those of you who are interested in exactly what Camunda is trying to do, we have a life cycle, which is very common for all kinds of software development. So it's not unusual to see something like this, but if you understand this, you'll start to understand where our software goes, right? Because we have loads of different tools, but they're all designed to fit in this cycle graph. So the first thing, of course, starts off with design. With Camunda, you probably already know this, but we design our process in the open standard BPMN. That's Business Process Model and Notation. It's an open standard for designing process models, and we have built our own desktop and web modeler so people can design them. Now, an interesting thing about BPMN is that we actually have a bunch of people who design them but don't even move to the next phase, because BPMN can be built for just design purposes, for just being able to model your processes for documentation. So that's perfectly fine. And if you're the kind of person who likes doing that, you can also use some of Camunda's tooling. Our modeler is more than capable of modeling for documentation, for those wondering. Now, I myself, I'm a big fan of implementation. It's like my favorite part. So when it comes to BPMN, my main goal is to turn that diagram into a working model. So we have an implementation section here. And again, this is part of the modeler. So what we can do is we can add execution semantics. And also we have a way of sort of connecting up services to the engine, which I'll sort of demo later on, to make sure that those implementations can be tested and work correctly. And that's kind of a key thing about what we do. We turn these models into executable running instances. As well as that, you also have the ability to, after you've run your processes for a while, we have a tool called Optimize and also Cockpit/Operate. These are tools where you can actually look into your process, see what's going on, to decide on whether the process is running the way you intend to, and that sort of thing. So with Analyze, we have some tooling as well. That can either help you move on to the improve section, or it can just help you keep your process moving, like with Operate, which I'll show later, whose main purpose is to be able to ensure that if you have a running process, that you're actually able to keep it running and keep everything moving along. So it has a whole bunch of tooling there for error handling and stuff like that. Now, generally speaking, Optimize reports on your tooling, and you can use that to improve your process. So Optimize fits in here quite well. This can give you information about things you can do to change your process. I won't be spending too much time talking about Optimize today. But that's a really cool tool, and it has loads of fun pictures in it and loads of fun colors, so people really like it. But if you have questions about Optimize, I can sure answer them. But I'll be focusing on probably these 3 steps here today, which is design, implement, and analyze. So I also want to talk about Camunda 8. So Camunda 8 was released sort of end of last year. Officially, the start of this year was the first version was released for public consumption. And the architecture of it works like this. In a Camunda, this big white box here is a thing you would get if you have if you go to Camunda.com and you create let's say a Camunda 8 SaaS account. This is something you can all do for free. So go ahead and do it if you like. I'll be showing you shortly what that means. But within this account, you have the ability to do two things. The first important thing is you have a web modeler where you could model your processes, but also you can have one or more clusters. Okay, so a cluster in Camunda 8 parlance is an entity of, it's in the back end is Kubernetes, but it's connected up with all of the things you need to execute and run your process. We have a series of ZB brokers. I'll go into that in more detail. That is the core engine. That is what the thing that moves the token. In a cluster, you also have 3 lovely front-end applications. You have Operate for messing around with your process, doing things like moving tokens, fixing errors, that sort of thing, the equivalent of C7 in Cockpit. And we also have a task list, which is where you can view and complete user tasks. There's also Optimize as well. In between these is an Elasticsearch, which is not very important, but it does exist. Now, your business logic is always external with C8, and this is one of the biggest differences from C7. So we'll talk about that in a few seconds, but generally speaking, Camunda works on what C7 called the external task pattern, in which your business logic, your microservice, exists outside of the scope of the Camunda platform, and it basically registers against it to do work. And that's the only way you can run business logic to an extent. Now with Camunda 7, the differences are kind of clear. The first thing that is kind of interesting, now we're using Camunda Run as an example here, because you can also use external task workers as well in Camunda Run. Optimize is externalized, and a very important difference is this thing here. Camunda 7 required a relational database. That would be something like Postgres or Oracle, or that's how we persisted data. Now, the Elasticsearch thing here is not where the engine persists its data for runtime. That actually happens internally. The Elasticsearch here is just where the engine exports data for other applications. In this case, what would happen would be the engine and Optimize and Cockpit and Task List, basically, we're all accessing the same database. One of the key reasons why we made such a big jump between 7 and 8 is by trying to remove the database here to make an architecture that was way more scalable. And it really, really is. I'll talk about the scalability in a second when I talk about ZB. But in Camunda 7, if you wanted to scale Camunda 7, you can see here that you would just start another instance of Camunda and then point it once again at the same database, which again creates a bottleneck there. But the main differences in 7 and 8 at the moment is that 7 allowed for what's called an embedded engine, which meant you could orchestrate Java classes and things like that on a very low level within a Spring Boot application, for instance. Camunda 8 is designed to be part of a distributed system. So it's very focused. It doesn't have the same use case the 7 does in terms of orchestrating like the internals of a microservice, but rather it wants to orchestrate microservices that are spread around a network or distributed around the place, which is why all the features it's designed for involve scalability, high throughput, and that sort of thing. Hopefully I'll show you how that works later. That was a cursory sort of difference there. If there's any specific questions, for instance, about the symbol sets that are supported or the roadmap, I'll see if I can answer as many as I can. But what I'll do is I'll leave you lovely people to add some questions to the Q&A about C8 and C7, and I'm sure I'll be able to answer them in more detail. So I want to talk about this little box here, the ZB brokers. This is essentially the equivalent of the Camunda engine. So the Camunda engine came as a fork from another engine called Activity in 2013. And ZB is something we built ourselves from scratch. So we built it from the ground up. And one of the key differences is how it scales. When you start up an instance of ZB, you do not get a single engine like you did with Camunda 7. What you get actually looks like this. In ZB, internally, okay, so ZB is all of these boxes. An instance of ZB contains at least 3 individual engines, so to speak, or nodes of the brokers, right? We call them brokers. And what happens is these 3 lovely lads exist as a way of processing things as fast as possible, and they are self-clustered. Clustering Camunda 7 wasn't necessarily difficult, but it did have problems with scalability. And we've removed those by internally clustering ZB. Now, one of the downsides of when you were clustering Camunda 7 was the input, because once you start to cluster them, you then might have a problem of, well, which node do I have to reach? And then you would have to implement a load balancer on top of that. With ZB, that's actually not necessary anymore. We have a gateway here by default, a single entry point, so that all your workers that are these things here can all point to the same endpoint to get jobs, and then it's the engine itself deals with putting the work around the different nodes. It means that you can scale this quite a lot. You could have as many brokers as you want, and in terms of how the scalability works, if one of the workers goes down, we actually have RAF protocol for ensuring the data gets moved around and that leaders and followers are spun back up. That's a much deeper conversation about how the internals of ZB works. I love having that conversation, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. But if there's any specific questions about how this scales, I'm sure I can answer them for you. For now, the important key things are that we have built an engine that is far more scalable with ZB and is designed explicitly to solve problems we found with a distributed system paradigm for Camunda 7 with ZB. So that was the only slides I have, because I'm a big fan of showing rather than telling. So I'm going to just, with Camunda 7, I'm going to build and deploy a process. I have a job worker running, and I'm also going to show a little bit about connectors and how they work. So, and they're pretty cool. I'll show you how they work. So yeah, let's jump into it. I'll do that by, I think I go back here. I think I had something ready. There we go. Are there any questions so far? There's one in Russian. Marvelous. I'll leave that as it is then. I'll translate it later. Actually, maybe I'll translate it now. See what I can do.
Niall, thank you.
Back there.
May I switch to Russian?
Yeah, that's not a question for me, which is okay. Okay, cool. Let's continue the fun. So I have created a, this is Camunda 8 SaaS. Everyone can log into this. It's pretty cool. We have the console here, and we have, this is my cluster that I talked about earlier. In my cluster, as I showed in the diagram, I have ZB, which is the worker. I have Operate, which is the tool we use for observing the process, task list for tasks, and Optimize. We also have a bit of details about the cluster. So, and that's Rupert, that's my other cluster. And this has nothing in it right now. We also have the other thing that I talked about, which is the modeler. So this is our cluster ready to go, and it doesn't have anything deployed to it. So I'm going to build a model. And for this, I'm going to open up the modeler, which is again available on Camunda 8. I have a whole bunch of fun projects here, but I'm going to create a new one. And this one's going to just be called, let's go with something fun like, oh yes, let's build the worker demo, because I want to show how workers sort of work. So here we have our process. We can then get our BPMN model. Let's say who's 50 process. Okay, so here's our model right here. We see that We have a start event. I can have an end event here, and everything. This, if you aren't familiar with this already, this is a standard part of BPMN. It doesn't differ too much between 7 and 8. We're using BPMN, and the modeler is pretty common. We do have a desktop modeler as well. The web one is quite handy for testing and stuff. So, for instance, I can do something like add a user task here. Enter celeb name. I should mention the kind of process I'm building. I'm building a very quick little process of a game called Who's 50? Get age of celeb. Very, very simple. If you enter the name of a celebrity and they are exactly 50 years old, you win. So let's Who's 50? Okay. And then we'll have a little gateway here. Are they 50? And we have a yes or a no. So the nice thing about this is that we can also create milestones. So I can save this as my draft. And then I can, let's say, realize that I actually need a new part of this. I need an error event for, let's say, celeb not found, and that'll go here. And I also need to label these. Don't worry about those errors. I'll discuss those shortly. And I can then go back and take a look at my model as it's changed. So you see that since version 1 that I saved, my newest version, I don't know why it's popping up there. There's the original version. I can see the things I've added since and edited since my new ones. And I would also see things that have been taken away as well. So it's a nice feature for keeping track of your model. Another cool thing you can do, which hopefully will work, is I can do token simulation, which is one of my favorite things. So what's going to happen in my process? Well, I start my process, I enter celebrity name, and then I arrive here. One of two things can happen. Either I guess a celebrity name or the celebrity is not found. If they're not found, we go up here and the process ends. If we do find the celebrity, we then hit a gateway. Either they're 50 or they're not. They're not. We go down here. And if they are, we will go this direction and win. Okay, so it's kind of nice to be able to use token simulation as well. There's a few other tools we have here. For instance, if I had thought about it, I could probably invite Mike to actually add some comments here. I can add him to the diagram, but I forgot to do that, so I didn't. So let's talk about these little red things. This is a linting tool that's showing me I'm missing execution semantics. So for instance, here it says a service task must have a definition type. If I select this, it'll go straight to exactly the missing part. If I select this, it'll show me also I need to enter this global variable. So let's just create this. And let's put it there. So this is clearly a service task, which means this is some code I'm running. So let's take a look at that code. There it is in all its glory. So this is a simple Java application. Let me just talk through it because it's very, very basic. So here's what this does. This makes an API call to a service, and then it gets a response, and then it'll then send that response back to the engine. The key things here that are Camunda specific that are important are we have these, if you're building a worker, we have a ZB client annotation, and we also have a ZB worker annotation. This thing here defines the topic that this worker will register for. So you see here that check celeb name, if I just copy this, is the thing that's going to correlate between the running instance and this specific task. Okay, so you can see here that then it takes a variable called celeb name, and then it makes the rest call, and then it sends back some data. We have here age, so I need that variable. So that this variable is 50, I win. And if not, I lose. Okay, so that's basically it. So now I just need to, I think it's kind of all I need to do. I'm going to quickly deploy this and see how it looks. So let's hope I didn't mess something up. And we should just be able to see the worker working. I have the yikes, not allowing close. Let's try again. See, this is the problem of like saying, I hope it works, because that just means it won't. So I'm going to refresh the page and hopefully it'll make me happy. Interesting. Okay. This is wonderful timing. Why would this not work? Okay, that's kind of weird. Let's take a look at my cluster and see what's going on. So here are my two clusters. They seem okay to me. Let's go to the modeler again. I always love seeing errors for the very first time when I'm demoing, because that's actually a really fun time to find them. I find any other time is less fun. Let's skip this for now, and I'll come back to it. Oh, interesting. So stuff is totally broken. That's interesting. Let's see what'll happen if I actually... So this is a cloud service, obviously, and therefore in Camunda 7, I would always demo things locally, which I used to never need to worry about. But I guess now I need to worry about this thing being a little bit funky. So let's see. The modeler does still work, so that's good. But the thing is kind of busted. So for that, I'm going to leave this for now. I'm going to build a different kind of model, because one of the things I also said I'd talk about was connectors, these things here. So I'll come back to running the job worker. It's pretty trivial. It's exactly the same as you would run a job worker for Camunda 7. But for this case, I want to show you connectors, because I really like connectors quite a lot. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to create a new project. And this is going to be trivia quiz. I really like quizzes. And let's see, I'm going to create a new BPMN file, and I'm going to just build a trivia quiz, but I'm actually going to build it, and this is quite unique about Camunda 7. I'm going to build it entirely without needing any external services running. I'm going to use what Camunda has called connectors. We used to have connectors in Camunda 7, but these are very different. So let's just call this trivia game. Okay, so in this, I'm going to use a very important connector, which is the REST connector. So the way you find them is, if you go to change an element, you'll see you'll have all the BPMN elements you've come to know and love, but we also have these things here. Now, these are pre-configured connectors that connect to various services like Kafka, RabbitMQ, SendGrid. The REST one is the easiest one to use, because it's very, you can use it for all sorts of stuff. And this just allows you to make a REST call directly from here. So this is going to get trivia question. Okay. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use a fun little, let me see if I can open it 1 second. Yeah, I'm going to use an API that I sometimes use for making quiz games, which is an API that if you query with the category, it'll give you a question back. Okay, so it's a little API called trivia, and it's going to be a category of geography. And when I'm going to query for this, it's going to give me a geography question. I then just need to add the headers, which is kind of important, which is, I'll get to in a few minutes, because I need it to add a key, an API key. And then I also need to deal with the response. So the response is going to be questions, or maybe let's just call it, yeah, questions is back. And then the response result, I can automatically parse. So let me show you how this actually looks if I make the call. So here is Postman, and you can see here's my call. And if I click send with geography, it gives me a question. The Andaman Islands belong to which country? And it's India. It's obviously India. They are on the off the east coast, kind of past Sri Lanka. I recently memorized the the different provinces of India, weirdly enough. So I happen to know that information. So this is what we get back. And we see here that we have an answer and a question. And those are the two things we're interested in. So what we need then is to be able to parse this. Now, this used to be massively painful in Camunda 7, having to parse JSON, because you would need to use some sort of annoying expressions. We use feel, which is absolutely fantastic for this, because feel just says the variable, this is what we're doing, the variable question is going to have the response, whatever the question from the response body is, will go into a variable called question, and whatever the response body for answer is will go into a variable called answer. And that will parse the entire JSON, which is really nice. It's really, really easy to do it. I'll show more about feel in a few minutes. So that's going to get us the information we need. The last thing we need is the headers. And this is kind of cool because this is, the headers is where you can add your API key, for instance. Now, you don't want to hard code something like an API key. So in Camunda, what you can do is you can actually have secrets stored on your cluster. So in my case, I created a secret here. Let me just show you. There we go. So the headers I'm going to put in, it says X API key, and it's going to have this thing, secrets.api.ninja. So sorry, API Ninja. So API Ninja is the name of the thing, and secrets is a keyword reserved here. So it'll go and look for your secrets and populate this header with that, so you don't have to put it anywhere. So next up, I'm going to have a simple user task. Look at questions. Well, this is going to be answer question. Cool. And let's have that as a thing. And then we're going to have a XOR gateway. Did you answer correctly? And we have a yes and a no. So, and this is when you win, and this is when you lose. So we now have made our call. Okay, we should then have an answer. I'm going to show you a little bit about the front end implementation just now. But first, I'm going to say that here we're going to create a variable called guess. And we're going to be able to use feel to decide on which way we should go. Now, in this case, our guess could actually be, you can see here that this is quite a long thing and it has uppercase and lowercase. So what we actually want to do is we want to be able to say, we want to ignore the case basically. And we can do that by saying lowercase answer 1. So this is the variable that comes back from the REST call. And we're going to say equals the guess that's made. So this is saying move those to lowercase and check if they're equal to each other. And for any other reason, we're going to go here. Okay. So the next thing I want to do is try and implement a nice front end here that I can actually try to show the question, but also to have a user guess something. So for that, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to go to the form builder. And this is going to be question form. And here we're going to have this thing here. This is going to say something like, oops, trivia. And it's going to have a question. And the variable is new question. And it's also going to need you to guess the answer. So it's going to have here a guess. It's going to be called guess. Okay. This should probably not be usable because I won't be able to change the question, but that's their problem. So they're the two kind of important things. We also have a bunch of other things we could add, but that's kind of all we need for now. And I'm going to go back now to our model. And I'm going to attach that user task. Okay. The next thing I want to do is I want to create an input for this. So I want to be able to say that the new question is going to be equal whatever the variable of answer is. So this is going to take the result from here that we've put into a variable called answer, and it's going to put it into this as new answer, which should be displayed to the user, I hope. Now, hopefully, it's been long enough that my system has come back online so I can deploy this. If not, at least I'll have more time for questions. So that's something. It's still broken. So what I'll do is, I can't deploy this just yet. It should work. But what I'll do is I will quickly take a look and see if there's any questions. And let's see if I can do that. In the meantime, I will try to fix that while I answer questions, because I can multitask. Is there an option to scale ZB brokers without data loss? So yes, there is, as of quite recently. So when you set up a ZB cluster, what you tell ZB is, you tell ZB, hey, I want X number of clusters with Y replication factors, right? Now, by default, you have 3 nodes with a replication factor of 2, which means every process instance is running on one node, but if that node goes down for any reason, there will be another copy of it on a different node. So that works quite well. So asking about scaling ZB brokers at data loss is, can you then increase the number of nodes without losing what's going on? And you can, because in the most recent version of ZB, we now have hot backups. So what you can do is you can create a backup of everything in ZB in parallel, and then you can basically redo the settings of how many brokers and things you want, and then restart that. I'm not sure if that's released yet. Now that I think about it, it might be in the next release. I think it is, but that is definitely something that I've seen various people testing and running internally for sure. I haven't tried it myself. Cool. Next question. Is there any option to set a specific database for Camunda's runtime data? Is that, so if it's Camunda 8, it doesn't have a database, but it does have an exporter, right? So you probably saw in my diagram that what I had was, it said Elasticsearch that was exported. It doesn't actually need to be Elasticsearch in particular. So the, well, there's another question. Yes, it's fine. So you can actually, the ZB has an exporter component that you can hook into and be able to export into multiple different things. Elasticsearch is the version that we have for our own front-end applications, but you can actually hook into that exporter and put it into multiple other kinds of data sources. That could be MongoDB, it could be could even be Kafka. Actually, it can be lots of things. So it's kind of up to you. Okay, I think I saw something in the chat show up. Yeah. So yes, someone mentioned that they could restore backups with the same number of clusters, same number of brokers. That is true of right now, but I think our next release will have an ability to update a new number of brokers using this active hot backup thing. So it's not released just yet, I guess. So another question we got here is, does Camunda 8 have external REST API like Camunda 7? Kind of is the answer. So by default, the most extensive API Camunda 8 has is gRPC. Okay, so and the reason we chose this is because it's very easy to auto build clients from a gRPC description. We also do actually have a REST API that does a small fraction of that stuff. It's usually and we have a GraphQL API. Sorry, let me go back. So the entire API is all exposed in, as I mentioned, gRPC. We have a small fraction of stuff that can be used in REST, which is usually stuff you can do within Operate. And then we have another bunch of stuff that can be done within GraphQL, and that's usually to do with user tasks. So either of those can be used. Camunda 7 had its fundamental what's it called? Its fundamental API was REST. So it was generally able to do REST API stuff and nothing else really. It didn't have a gRPC or GraphQL. So that's that. So yeah, in answer, some but not all is the answer to that one. Could you please tell us about the licensing for Camunda 8, which parts are open source? There is a, so let me actually explain that. There's a much more detailed article that I'll try and post in the chat, but the short answer is you can basically use Camunda 8. It has an open source license. It's a source available with one stipulation. It's kind of what in the open source industry has recently become known as the anti-Amazon clause, which basically means you can't take Camunda 8 and ZB in particular and sell it as a service, right? You can't do what we do with our SaaS integration. But what you can do is use this yourself internally to build your own processes, use ZB for your own projects. That's not a problem. Some of the front-end applications like Operate are not open source. But we do have alternatives like ZB Simple Monitor is one that exists. The modeler is open source, as it always is. And I think the main thing that's not open source is the front-end applications. Yeah. Can you suppose when could be the scalable backup version? I would not want to guess at when that probably is. Now I do have some good news, which is I think the servers are back up online, so I can probably be able to deploy some stuff now. So let's find out. Because I got a couple more minutes left. I can see if I can finish the demo, and I'll get back to any questions. Seamless transition. Look at that. You can tell I'm a professional. When everything breaks, I can still get stuff basically working. Mike, can you let me know if this is visible?
Yep, looks good.
Great. So let me just refresh this and hope that I'm able to deploy it. Oh, not this one. I'll deploy the other one. This one here. Okay, so here's the trivia game that we created. So let's deploy this. I'm going to deploy it to a cluster that I ironically named Unstable Unicorn just before this demo. So I guess it's my own fault or my hubris for calling it something unstable. So I'm going to deploy it. Its diagram is deployed. Great. And now I'm going to start an instance. And I haven't tested this, so I have no idea if it'll actually work the first time I run it. But let's find out what error. If not, I can show you how error handling works. So there we go. We have Operate is running. This is the view you would get from Operate once it loads. We are here. This is not a good sign. This probably means it's going to throw an error. Oh, no, it didn't. So it's done something. So it's moved here. So I can find out by going to my clusters that I'm sure will load perfectly if I refresh this page. By going to my clusters, I can go into task list, which should hopefully show the front end that I built. Okay, so here it is. So interestingly, I give a question that just says New Jersey, which means I almost certainly did something really wrong here. So I put the answer instead of the question. So I said the so that's not good. That's quite bad. So I'm actually going to guess New Jersey. I don't know what the question is, but at least I can get the question correct. Okay, so now we should see this was the most densely populated state in the US. Okay, that's great. Hey, I got it right. It was New Jersey. Who would have thought? So let's try that again. If you don't get a deployment error, you get a runtime error. So that should work now. I hope. Let's deploy it now and find out. So I'm going to deploy a new version. I'm going to start it. Okay, and then go back to. Yeah, does someone have a question? Let's see if this worked. So let's go to version 2. So looks like we made it.
Sorry, Niall. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can I interrupt you a little bit just to check the feedback from our audience here in offline? It's a little bit difficult for some of us to understand. Maybe in English, it's not a native language. So let me just get this feedback.
Sure.
Just a second.
No problem. I'll try very hard to speak slower. Luckily, it's got a certain amount of pictures, which are good. So here's the question: where are the Nazca lines? Any idea? Does anybody know the answer?
Niall, sorry, we got
Yeah.
a question here.
Yeah, sure.
Niall, hello. My name is Vert. Nice to meet you.
Hey, how's it going?
You're really a lawyer of Camunda. You're so like I can say that you are aggressive. So all lawyers should be like you. This much energy. So cool. I want to ask: do you have meetups where you are welcoming people who doesn't know what it is, Camunda? What is that IT? What I'm saying that because many people in our region, Michael can prove that doesn't know how to switch on or switch off the computer. So I came with but it's sad truth. So I came here with my people. We not so many here, but anyway, I brought them here to make introduction to all of this what's happening here with Camunda, and I like it so much, and I wanted to show them how great is Camunda, how great is BPMN. So what you are saying, you immediately dived in the all this process and technical details here, right? So not many people here understand English, unfortunately. So is it possible to get some other meeting where business people who doesn't know what does it mean IT will understand how Camunda can help in their sector, in their business? So all these kinds of stuff without diving in IT stuff. Thank you so much, Niall.
No problem at all. Thank you for the question. The answer is absolutely is the answer. So generally speaking, for Camunda events like this, I tend to speak in a way that I assume that most people are building technical models and most people have some idea about Camunda. This isn't the most common way, in fact, that I do Camunda presentations. I will usually go to conferences where I don't expect anybody to know anything about Camunda, and sometimes they're very technical conferences, and sometimes they're conferences aimed at business people who want to build BPMN models. So it just kind of depends. The nice thing is that if this is something that this particular group in Almaty is interested in, then I would very happily give a talk on any side of that perspective. In this case, I picked a talk that I think was relevant, I think, based on the sheer size of the community there. Actually, it's much bigger than I thought it was going to be, even, and I was told beforehand that it would be quite big. So it's nice to see so many people here. So I picked a topic that generally in most other meetups is quite a common topic to be interested in for the community. But absolutely, yeah.
Niles, thank you very much. It's okay, actually. I think the question of my colleague was more to us than to you, because we prepared presentation. We just prepared to take off after your presentation to switch to Russian and provide some more business side, presentation. And I think we have a question to you. Another question. Just a second.
Hi, Niall. I've got many questions. Let
Great.
me just cut it to two. So first of all, about the licensing model, right? So, for example, if if I'm building some SaaS, right, and which is based on Camunda, right? I'll be using Camunda. Then, so based on your words, I cannot use Camunda, right? So there is a licensing restriction. So this is the question number one. And the second question regarding the business data separation. So I've been asking this question, but I don't have the clear answer. So for example, I have, so best practice is not to store the business data in the Camunda database, right?
Right.
So, but then I'll have the issue with synchronizing this data, like the task data with the business, like business task data, right? So any improvements on with the new version?
So
thank you.
No problem at all. Let me tackle the first question first. It'll be probably a little easier. There are some details, as I said, about exactly what the restrictions are. The restrictions are, again, they exist to protect Camunda's SaaS offering. So that's the only restrictions that exist, which means if you are creating a competitor to Camunda, which means that you want to sell Camunda's like ZB as a service, then that's a restriction that you can't use. If you wanted to use ZB as a SaaS, as part of a SaaS product you're building, but ZB itself is not the thing you're selling, then it's fine. Generally speaking, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not actually entirely sure I can give you like the definitive answer, but that's what we've tried to go with the wording of the restriction of the license is, and the goal of it is simply that we don't want another much bigger company to be able to put our software in their cloud and offer it as a service when we would like to do that ourselves. The second question was about data, and absolutely it is. You're absolutely right. It's very much best practice to keep IDs of data inside the engine. There's a bunch of ways of dealing with this. Because Camunda 8 is based around purely external services, external front end and external services themselves, what the front end and services could do, and probably should do if you want to get the most recent version of the data you want to display, is to get the ID out of the engine, and then the service or front end itself can then query for the data that it needs based on the ID that's stored in the engine. An example would be, you would, let's say, query for a user task. You would then get back the information of that user task as well as an ID that references, let's say, an entity, some kind of data entity. And then the front end could then, before it displays anything, query your entity data for what that object actually is, and then populate it in the user form. You don't have to avoid storing any data in the engine. You just shouldn't really store stuff that you expect the engine to treat like a source of truth, right? So let's say that you did have an entity within the engine. It should always be considered a copy of the original. And as soon as it's copied, it should be considered out of date, because the real source of truth is where you store your real entity data. Now, the thing is, it's much harder to store entity data in C8 than it was in C7. So that'll hopefully mean that people will implement the best practices themselves in a better way. I hope